Our regional conflicts taking center stage as ASEAN leaders wrap up their three-day summit in Laos. US top diplomat Antony Blinken reiterating calls for freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, while stressing the importance of developing strong ties with the bloc during his meeting with partner nations in capital Vientiane. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, meanwhile, told media that the US was a destructive force in Asia and accused Washington of being behind the militarization of Japan. The newly minted Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba had previously called for a NATO-style Asian pact, but did not discuss that concept during this meeting. Chinese Premier Li Qiang earlier warned Mr. Ishiba against attempting to introduce what he calls bloc confrontation to the region. The Japanese leader, meanwhile, repeating his concerns over intensifying Chinese military activities around Japan. Li Qiang also calling on nations to play a constructive role to ensure peace and stability in the South China Sea. The Philippines yesterday accusing Beijing of harassment and intimidation, urging nations to speed up negotiations over a code of conduct for the South China Sea. But beyond these contested waters, the 10-member bloc has been unable to push through on other difficult regional issues. In particular, efforts to resolve the crisis in Myanmar. Just yesterday, ASEAN vowed to embark on wider measures to broker peace in the conflict-hit country, after describing efforts by the military government as, quote, substantially inadequate. As the summit wraps up, Laos has passed the chairmanship baton to Malaysia, with Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim taking the symbolic gavel from his Laos counterpart and outgoing chair Sonsai Siphandon.
Malaysia has chosen the theme inclusivity and sustainability. It reflects our aspirations for truly shared progress, ensuring that no one is left behind. It conveys our hope that the steps we take today will endure in the long run. It underscores our determination to keep the future firmly in sight as we move forward.
And more, CNA's Leong Wai Kit joins us live from Vientiane. Wai Kit, we just heard that US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, he is at this summit to make clear that Washington's commitment to the region stays secure, whatever happens at elections in November. What are Washington's hopes in terms of what came out of his statements that he made at the summit?
Well, it is very clear that Antony Blinken, Washington's presence here in Vientiane, is to counter China. That's based on the remarks and comments made coming out of the ASEAN meetings here. Earlier during the ASEAN-US talks, he had raised the point that China is behaving unlawfully and dangerously on the South China Sea. But he had also talked about Taiwan at a media conference held later on in the day. Let's take a quick listen first to what he said then.
We want to reinforce, and many other countries want to reinforce, the imperative of preserving the status quo, and neither party taking any actions that might undermine it. And again, this goes to something that's very powerfully felt across the region.
Now, Mr. Blinken also weighed in on Taiwan leader William Lai's speech made on Double 10 Day. In that speech, Mr. William Lai had said that Taiwan would resist annexation. Now, that comment, of course, sparked an angry rebuttal by China, who slammed Mr. William Lai for being hell-bent on independence. But earlier at the media conference, Mr. Antony Blinken said that the Double 10 speech is a regular exercise, and I quote, that China should not use that as a pretext for provocative actions. Now, the other key goal of Washington's presence here is to remind ASEAN leaders that Washington has not forgotten about the region, even though many would point out that US President Joe Biden has skipped the summit for the second time in a row. Now, at the media conference, Mr. Blinken was also asked about his views on ASEAN-US ties moving forward. Of course, this is in the context of looming elections back home in Washington. Let's take a listen to how he responded.
Our focus has remained intensely on this region. And again, it's because it's so critical to our own future, to the lives and livelihoods of Americans. So given that, it's my belief that that basic approach will continue, irrespective of who's president, because it's so manifestly in our interests.
Wai Kit, Mr. Blinken may be concerned about Taiwan, but within the region, concerns about the South China Sea and, of course, Myanmar coming up again and again. Any headway made on these areas, amongst others?
Wesu, again and again is correct. This has been a recurring topic, but during the wrap-up media conference by Laos ASEAN Chair Prime Minister Sonsai Siphandone, he did not talk very much about it. He gave a very broad stroke of the outcomes of the meeting, which he described as very productive, but there was no time at all, Wesu, to delve deep into sensitive topics like Myanmar, South China Sea, Middle East or Ukraine, because we were told that the Prime Minister had a very tight schedule, so there was no time for Q&A, which of course leaves many journalists hanging dry because we have so many questions. I have so many questions, chief of which is how the informal talks on Myanmar, how that mechanism is going to work, because surely those informal talks would produce outcomes. Now, what if those outcomes were starkly different from the 5-point consensus which ASEAN wants to use on Myanmar? Would we then see a 5-point consensus plus? And if not, then what real impact would these informal talks be? These questions I meant to ask during the presser but did not get an opportunity to. The other key question is participation. Now, I'm told by sources that the talks on Myanmar is going to be held in Bangkok, and the date is tentatively December 19. I reached out to military sources and asked them whether they will take part. They told me that they have not received an invite yet. The NUG, on the other hand, also told me that they have no information as yet, but they always appreciate engagement with ASEAN.
Oh, thanks, Leong Wai Kit. Looking ahead to these informal talks on what happens in Myanmar, these are due to be held, as he mentioned, in Bangkok later this year. Leong Wai Kit reporting live from Vientiane.